Once the footy season finishes in Victoria, it's all about fishing, and it's pretty much all about one species between now and Christmas, and that's the snapper. They migrate out of Bass Strait, they come into Port Phillip and Western Port to feed and spawn, and it's a very, very exciting time of year. We're out here in the pre-dawn darkness because that's a big part of snapper fishing. We're going to fish these shallow areas just for a couple of hours and try and find you a bigger snapper. When I say shallow, 12 metres right down to 4 metres of water. That's where you quite often find those big fish. They come in here because there's a lot of food and they get in here to eat and feed, and they're sort of a bit more on their own generally. The big fish like to stay away from the smaller fish. Once it gets light, we'll head out a little bit deeper, try and find some bigger schools of fish, and quite often they're a little bit smaller, but the numbers are there. There's several factors to snapper fishing that can really increase your success. A couple of things. A range of baits is very, very important because just like us humans, snapper don't always want to eat that one thing day in and day out. So we like to bring a range of baits, and that can be anything from silver whiting and pilchards to garfish to barracuda. Pretty much any nice fresh bait fish. They love squid, so things like that are always good. Another key ingredient is burley. I'm going to show you all these techniques, how to rig your baits, how to burley, and different things you can do. There's not one set way to do it, and I'm not saying the way that I do it is the only way or the most correct way. It just gives you hopefully a few more options so that when you come out here, not only are you going to hopefully catch a snapper, but you're going to do it with a bit of confidence, and that's what it's all about. Confidence is the key to catching fish, so we're into it. Now what Morne's doing here is he's preparing, and preparation is the real key also to catching your fish. You want to be organised. You don't want to be trying to do things and rig stuff up and cut things when the fish are going, because fish will feed in very specific windows, and you'll get a lot of your action in short bursts. So he's actually pre-cutting a whole pile of burley, and this is probably our favourite burley for snapper fishing. It's a block of pilchards. You chop them up while they're semi-frozen because it's much easier, and you cut them into different sizes from tiny to fat chunks to all sorts of stuff. And the idea of all this is basically that's your burley right there. Pilchard cubes, you chuck them out, they sink down through the water, and they're very, very oily and soft, and they let out lots of smell, and they really help to bring the fish in. You can see there's a bigger chunk there and then some smaller chunks right there, and the idea of all that is this will sink faster, this will sink slower, this will carry a little bit further in this slight tide that we've got, and it's a very, very slight tide, so just helps to get your burley out through the area. That's all you do, get a handful, spray it out around the back of the boat just like that. It sinks down and it helps to bring those fish in towards us, and not only does it help to bring them in, it helps to hold them in the area so we can catch not only one but hopefully a whole bundle. Not really what we're after, but this is a big part of what lives in Port Phillip Bay. It's an 11-legged starfish, called so because it has 11 legs. This is part of the bay, and this is something we need to look after. There's also another one here called Northern Sea Star. He's a bright orange fellow with about 5 legs. A lot of people unfortunately think these are bad news. The orange ones, the Northern Sea Star, they are bad news, and if you catch one, you should keep it in the boat. When you get home, chuck it in the bin, or when you get back to the boat ramp. But these guys, throw him back because he's meant to be here. But yeah, unfortunately, a lot of guys think they're the bad ones, so they kill them. But let him go, he's supposed to be there. They live on all the mollusks and stuff on the bottom. They also don't mind your odd snapper bait. And this is also a really good tip. See a lot of guys, they come out and they chuck their baits out and they kick back in the chair and they have a bit of a snooze, and it's all good. If you really want to catch snapper, you do what we call working your baits. Every couple of minutes you start winding them in, you check them, you cast them back out. It creates this activity of baits being wound in, baits sinking back down through the water column. Helps to attract fish to the area. Also, if your baits are a bit ratty and chewed, you can change them because there's a lot of small flathead in the bay and they will chew your baits up. So keep active. By the end of the day, if you've done it right, you will be buggered. The other burley that's well worth having, and you can use anything, you know, you were talking about pilchards, and when you've got a bait that's a bit chewed up by a flathead or something, don't just wind him in, chuck him over the side, chop him up and use him for Berley as well, silver whiting, whatever. The other thing that's always handy is an actual pellet Berley, and this is super Berley that we use, and it's actually just a big chunky heavy pellet. It's got fish meal in it, and the fish do absolutely love it. It's been soaked in tuna oil. They're actually a pink pellet like that we use, and we put a bit of tuna oil over and they soak it in. The bonus with these, they're quite big and heavy. They sink fast, but as they're sinking, they're actually breaking down, and they lay on the bottom and they break down. They put out a lot of smell, a lot of scent for the fish when they come along. There's not really a lot to eat because it's just like tiny little bits of bran. It's good gear. In the holder, got him on, and this is about the perfect time of the day. I don't think it's a very big fish, but I don't care, it's still a snapper, just on first light. And that fish, I reckon he was sitting there for about a minute. You just see the tip just a little bit just bounce, and they don't always come in and smash the baits, and early season they do play around a bit, and once it gets light, we'll show you a whole bunch more techniques and things so that you can actually see what's going on. We use nice light gear on these, probably lighter than the standard sort of snapper gear. And again, I'm going to run through all that, but we want to get this first fish in the boat to give you all a good look at a Port Phillip Bay snapper. Here we go. Oh, it's more of what we'd class as a Port Phillip Bay pinky, but who cares, it's all good. There we go. A nice fat fish. Ow, that just spiked me. There we go. Great looking thing they are. Hang on one sec, mate. Hang on one sec, I'll get these hooks out here. One right in the corner of the jaw. And he scoffed a fresh garfish. One of my favourite baits, and probably one of his. Ow! Very spiky, but a great looking thing anyway. The thing that gets many, many people excited. I'm going to pop him back. It's your lucky day, pal. This is a really good reason as to why it pays to check your baits. That's been chewed out by a little flathead or just small fish on the bottom. And sure, a snap will come and eat that, but if you check your baits regularly, you'll see this sort of stuff going on, and then you can easily rip him off, put him on the bait board, and chop him up to add to your Berley. Put a fresh pilchard on, again, and you're back in business with that nice fresh bait, and it's got more oils coming out of it because it's new. That's been in the water for a little while, so it's probably lost most of its scent, or the powerful part of its scent. But get him back out and you're in business again. As much as that's no good, when you're snapper fishing, it is good. It's a good thing. It means you're on some good bottom, and it's all these mollusks and stuff that live down on the bottom, and this is the sort of stuff the snapper are feeding on. They come through and there's actually some little wormy thing inside that there, and they come along and just munch this sort of stuff up. And it also holds a lot of things like shrimp and small mollusks and stuff, so it's always a good sign if you're pulling things like that up off the bottom. Well, we've been in this shallow sort of area and we've got that one small fish. We didn't find the big one, but now we're just going to make a small move. We're going to move slightly deeper to another sort of, you know, that 14, 16 metre line. And this is a good thing to do when you're snapper fishing. Keep moving, you know, you keep changing your depths. Don't necessarily, if you're not catching fish in 12 metres, Mawns is just pulling the anchor. If you're not catching fish in 12 metres, sometimes rather than going further down the line and fishing in 12 metres again, go out a little bit deeper or come in a bit shallower. Just sort of keep changing your depths. It's worth keeping the radio on as well. You'll hear guys talking on the radio and they'll say, yeah, we get him in 16 metres or we get them in 18 metres. You know, you quite often don't have to be exactly where those blokes are, but you'll find the fish will be feeding in certain set areas. Now when you're fishing in Port Phillip and Western Port, a GPS and a good fish finder are very, very important. What you're seeing right there, rolling off the screen, is 2 snapper. Very important because the bottom out here is pretty much flat and there's not a lot of reef and structure. So these fish will be scattered just through an area. There we go, there's another fish right there. This is a good sign. I really like to find schools of snapper. They're a little bit spread out rather than the big bunches. Sometimes you'll mark 20 or 30 fish just all in a ball. Quite often they're moving and not really feeding, but a couple of fish just scattered through the area like this. There's another one there. Sort of indicates fish that are spread out and they're feeding. They just mooch around along the bottom, sticking their heads in the mud, digging things out. So that looks pretty good. There's been probably 3 or 4 fish in the last 100 metres. If you idle nice and slow, you'll get a nice clear reading on your sounder. And with this sort of blue clutter that's here, that's important to have too, because if you have your sensitivity down too low, you won't pick up those fish that are sitting right down close to the bottom. So you need a little bit of scratchy stuff coming through on your sounder, is all you need to do is adjust your sensitivity down. See, if I keep turning this down, see the screen goes completely clear with no marks on it. But also if a fish is sitting close to the bottom, we probably won't pick him up. So you've got to find that happy medium of turning it up so you've got a bit of clutter and you'll mark more fish every time. If you see something good, that's where a GPS is handy. You can just go bang and press the mark button, save the mark and come back to it. And it's also quite important because quite often you'll find patches of fish, and if you have a good session way out in the middle of the bay and you're sitting there, that looks really good. Look at that, that's a snapper sitting on the bottom again there. So there's a few fish through here, but if you have a good session, you want to be able to mark it so you can go back to it next time, because it can be hard to find in the dark, or trying to get landmarks can sometimes be hard, and that's where GPS is just so good. And you could actually be sitting on a scallop bed, and even the scallop beds, they're just dead flat. The scallops live in the mud and the snapper get right in on them and eat them. So look, we've got more fish through here again. It's all good, all good. We're just gonna loop around a little bit. You also wanna work out how you're gonna sit. At the moment, we've got a northerly breeze this morning and the tide's running out. So you wanna just come around. If you mark fish over there, you wanna point the nose up into it. There we go, fish and bait. You wanna point the nose up into it so that when you anchor, you'll come straight back onto those fish. Just drop the anchor. Just kick the boat into reverse, just slowly. That's the anchor going down right now, that you can see that line on the sounder. Give yourself a fair bit of anchor rope too. A lot of guys, they anchor and they keep their anchor rope, you know, at a fairly sharp angle. What you'll find will happen in this very soft mud that's out here in the bay, with the steep angle, it will actually lift your anchor out if it's a bit rough, and you'll just keep slowly drifting. It's really, really annoying. So let a fair bit of rope out, get a good angle, and it helps the anchor to dig in much better. There we go, engine off. Got the GPS here, that's us right there. If I zoom it in, that's where we're sitting. We drop the anchor right there and we're coming back here now. I like to turn the sounder off as well. A lot of guys leave it on, but personally I like to turn it off. It's up to you. One good thing can be if you're in an area and you're sure there's fish here, it doesn't hurt to sometimes turn it on, because it sends a pulse down through the water. And I'm fairly sure it's an electrical pulse. The fish will be able to feel it, and quite often you turn the sounder on and a minute or two later you'll get fish, and that could possibly be because they felt this pulse bouncing down over the top of them if they're sitting straight under the boat, and it might just make them move out a little bit and they go, hang on, there's a bait, I'll eat that. It's all about theories and tips and all that. It's all good. Now, it's a fact of life when you're fishing for snapper in Port Phillip Bay, for instance, that you use multiple rods for several reasons. Not a lot of structure out here, as I've mentioned, so the fish will just be grazing through an area. So fishing several rods increases your options, because A, you can fish several baits, but you can also spread your baits in pretty much a 180-degree arc around the back of the boat, and you work on the theory, more baits in the water, more fish are going to find them, sort of thing. So the key is, though, down here, and a lot of people, especially interstate, are quite surprised when they see photos of the back of the boats in Victoria, or even if they just see a boat. You've got what we call a snapper rack here, and it keeps your rods sitting beautifully spread out, but also at a nice low angle. And the idea of this is that with your rod at this low angle, you can see everything that's going on, but when you get a bite, the rod's pointing at the water level. So when you get a bite, the tip doesn't have to bend a lot before there's actual drag pressure. So when the fish takes off, and we use a thing called strike drag a lot, and the idea of that is that when the fish grabs the bait, he takes off, the rod bends a bit, the line springs tight, and he hooks himself. If the rod was to sit in a holder such as that, at that sort of angle, with the rod being up in the air, the fish comes along, grabs the bait, and he might not fully have it, you know, down his mouth. The tip will bend, and there's a lot of tip flex, and there's pressure there, but there's not enough pressure there to actually set the hook because these fish are just sort of moving off with it. So what'll happen, that tip will bend, the fish goes, hang on, something's not quite right here, there's not enough pressure to set that hook, and they spit it out. So you're much, much better off, guys, to let them sit at this nice low angle. A lot of people go, oh, but they'll fall out of the holder. They won't, because the more downward pressure of a fish taking your bait and pulling, the more it lifts the back of the rod up here, the more it locks it into that holder and it can't go anywhere. So that's a very, very good thing. You don't lose rods. The only thing, you don't want to bump them and knock them out, because that can happen. So it's worth doing. You can buy 3-way holders that will fit into a normal angled rod holder like this, and it will give you sort of a spread of 3 rods out like that, because not everyone has these snapper racks. The bonus is when you don't need to use them, you take them out. These lift straight out, so when we go tuna fishing, they're out of the way. You don't need them in the boat in those instances, so you leave them at home. Now the great thing about snapper fishing, you don't need heaps and heaps of gear. You need a few rods, some hooks, sinkers, swivels, and obviously a bunch of bait. Now there's several different ways that you can actually rig your baits, and there's several different rigs you can use. We like to use a sinker running on the line to a swivel and a leader, and we quite simply do that because we only fish light line, generally from 8 to 10 or 12 pound. And if we run that straight to the hooks, there's always that chance that if the snapper swallows that bait right down, the light line, he gets it in the corner of his jaw, and either his teeth, if his 2 pinching teeth get together, he can cut the line, or just the power of his jaw squashing down on that line can break it. So we tend to run a heavier leader. The reason we also do that is when we're half hitching the bait. So I'm going to show you how to rig baits in a minute. But rig wise, you can do it a couple of ways. Very, very simply, if we get a bit of fishing line just like this, a couple of hooks, 5/0s are probably my favourite for snapper fishing in the bay, and you quite simply tie your hook on the line, one like that, straight through there. Give yourself a little bit to work with. Twist that sort of 5 times, straight back through there, and then again back through that loop, and that locks the knot. Wet it, slide it down, give it a pull, don't bite it with your teeth, and then trim the knot with a pair of scissors. 1 hook on the line like that is perfect, and then we always tend to use 2 hooks. The second hook, you can very simply drop it on the line like this, and you can either leave that sliding just like that, up and down the line, and I'll show you how you can rig your bait this way, and this is probably the most common way guys do it in Port Phillip Bay, or as we like to do, if you do a thing called a fixed or a snelled rig, you basically just set your hooks apart whatever distance you want. That's always pretty good about there. The line's running straight through the eye of that hook. You come straight back down and you wind that down the shank like that. This is 20 pound leader. It's fluorocarbon, and it's very, very good for this. So you've wound down the shank about 10 to 15 times, and then I come up once, and then straight back through there, just like that. And you've got yourself one rig that's ready to go. So that's one style of rig you can use, that's very popular. The other rig, I'm going to make one just like I said before. We'll get 1 hook, time straight on, straight through there. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Back through that loop, and then back through there again. Slide him up a bit, wet it, give it a bit of a pull on the tag, trim it, and then we'll just quite simply get another hook and drop him straight on like that. That's one other rig. Then the third rig, and this is possibly one of my favourites, is the use of a circle hook. Circles have become very, very popular these days, and quite simply, it's very similar to that suicide pattern, but as you can see, that tip's curved right in like that. Looks a bit funny and it looks like I probably couldn't hook anything, but what it actually does is it will catch the fish right in the corner of the jaw. Very effective, and they're called a circle hook or a long line hook, and they use them because the lines are on the professional boats are set out there and the fish have to go and hook themselves. So very good. I'll make another rig up with that and then I'll show you how to bait them up. One more, and if you ever want to snell the top and the bottom hook, which is going to give you that style of knot very, very easily, lay your back hook, which is going to be this one, along here, and then put the end of that line just through there like that, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, like that, and then pull that up through there. Your hook's now snelled on the line. Makes it sit very straight and makes it have a very good hooking ability in that sense. Okay, so we've got him, another 5/0 hook, and we're going to snell that one as well. And this is just with a quick snell like I showed you. Down there, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Up once, through the eye of the hook, and there you go, you're dangerous. Now, as far as it goes for weight, you can either use no sinkers, a small sinker, a bigger sinker, whatever you need to use to get your bait down there. We like to use a range so they don't sink too fast, because quite often these snapper will come up through the water column and they'll sit a couple of metres off the bottom. So if your bait just sinks down a little bit slower, they'll quite often grab it before it even hits the bottom. So you've got a couple of options here, and this is a great thing for casting distance. A ball sinker, just like that, doesn't have to be huge. Drop him on the line, just like that. Get yourself a swivel. This is a crane swivel. You've also got rolling swivels, both of which are very, very good, and I much prefer them over the other standard swivel which has got the twisted ends on it, because these guys are much, much stronger and they do actually twist or spin much better, so they stop your line twist a whole lot more. So you've got your rig, you've got your sinker on it, and we'll very simply now tie the swivel on it straight through there. 2, 4, 5, through the loop again, and then back through there, slide him up, and that rig is ready to roll. The other way you can do it is just tie your swivel straight on and then run your sinker above it. And if we're running the sinker above the swivel, I much prefer a barrel sinker like this. It's a long, skinny sort of sinker, and the idea of it is that it lays on the bottom like that, and the line can pass through it very easily. When the snapper grabs the bait, it pulls it, and it does tend to work very well. A ball sinker, we find quite often, if it's above the swivel, twists up on the line occasionally, and it can result in a bite off. I don't like to use these swivels running straight down onto the hooks, because what I have seen happen, and it's only happened once, but it was a good fish, and it's only got to happen once and you'll never do it again. If this sinker was running right down on here, snapper comes along, grabs the bait, inhales the whole lot, and they've got really strong jaws, and they can quite often just grab the edge of that sinker and just pinch it down because it's soft lead, and that can actually crush the line, get the fish near the boat or halfway through the fight, everything breaks, and you can quite often get your sinker back, no hooks, and the line's cut right there. So we tend to use a ball sinker because they can't, for this instance, they tend to not be able to crush that onto the line. So just a couple of options right there, just like that. So you've got 3 different rigs, all of which are very, very effective. Now I'm going to show you how to bait them all up. Okay, so we've got our rigs, going to put the baits on now, and quite simply, your bait, whether it's a silver whiting like this, or a pilchard, or whatever, it's basically going to go down and lay on the bottom of the bay. Now when a snapper comes along, they tend to grab things by the head, because as a fish, if you're going to eat something, if you eat it tail first, which you can do if you've got really sharp teeth and you can chop it into sections, But if you try and swallow that from the back, there's all spikes and everything, and all the scales, they're rough if you go that way and smooth if you go this way, and all these spikes will sort of stick up and they can catch in the fish's throat. So what they'll tend to do is grab the head where everything folds down nice and smooth and is slick, and it goes straight down the hatch just like that, nice and easy. So we're going to rig our baits backwards because they're going to lay on the bottom. There's not a lot of tide, as I said, and they're just going to sit there. So very simply, this rig here that I showed you before, which has got one hook sliding on the line just like that, doing nothing, very easily grab the bottom hook, which is tied, get a bait such as a pilchard, and personally I like to go about sort of 2/3 the way down the fish and sort of through his back, stick that hook straight through like that, pull it all the way through, just as you see there. Then bring that hook back over the top of the fish, and then the only bit that sort of I find important, start just back behind his gill case, stick that hook in there, and then actually pop that hook out through the fish's gill case, and you find it sticks out nicely out the side of the bait. You don't want to go and hide your hooks. If you hide your hooks, the fish suck it in, and they've got this big hard mouth, and you tend to miss fish. If they're sticking out nice and clear like that, your hook up rate will be far better. The other bonus is if you stick that hook out of that gill plate there, that's really hard, so that hook's nice and solid in there. It's not going to roll over and bury back into the bait or do anything like that. So you've got that first hook in, and then it's a simple matter of letting that second hook slide down to the bait just like that. Then about 2/3 the way up the fish, stick the hook in his side, pop it out just like that. And what you've now got is two awesome hooks that are deadly sharp, sticking out either side of the bait, both of which will catch the fish, but generally this is the one that does the damage. Then to secure the bait, we do a half hitch. You make a loop in the line, slip him over the tail of the fish, and again, you can do it two ways. A lot of people just do them right up here. I like to do one down there near the hook, and then do one other one right up here near the tail. If they're spread out like that, and if you use a heavier leader, and that's why we also don't use the 12-pound line straight through, because it's nice and fine, the 12-pound line, it locks right in around the spine of the bait when it gets pulled on. And it does two things. A, it's impossible to get the little loops undone when you're trying to swap your bait, but also the fish's spine can be quite sharp, and through the force of a fight, that little half hitch locks around the spine, and if it's sharp, it's only 12-pound line, if that's what you're using, it can actually wear through and snap. 20, 30, 40-pound line just like this is much, much harder, and especially something like fluorocarbon. It's got a lot of abrasion resistance, so that there is absolutely perfect. The bonus is, as I said, the heavier leader. It's much stiffer. When it comes time to swap your bait over or whatever, you can very easily just unloop the half hitches straight off like that. Makes it faster and easier, so you get your bait back in the water quicker. That's one bait. The other way, if you're going to do it, is say with the circle hook or the two suicides, either one. They're both snelled just like this. Exactly the same principle again, and you work on the theory that these circle hooks, they're going to catch the fish in the corner of the jaw, so I'm going to put him down at this end of the bait. That's why that hook's on the bottom. Okay, same thing again, just pick the scales off, just like that. Stick that hook straight through, pull it through just like that, and again, just back behind the gill case, in there, and then actually pop him out in the gill case where it's nice and hard. That one there, that one there, one half hitch, two half hitches, and your bait is again ready to roll. Always make sure that there's no scale stuck over the hook. It's amazing to think that a tiny little scale like that, if that's sitting on the point of that hook just like that, the old snapper comes along, grabs the bait, that hook will not go in. It's like, I don't know, it's like a blunt piece of, a solid piece of wood, it just won't go in. If I pick that little scale off, make sure he's not there, that hook is all of a sudden needle sharp, and you can just see it just keeps catching my skin every single time, and that's what you want it to do. The other very, very important thing is, guys, these hooks these days, whether they're Gamakatsus or owners, and whether they're a circle or a suicide or a long shank, they're very high carbon steel. They're chemically sharpened, and that's how they get so sharp. couple of things. If you go fishing this weekend and leave them on the rods, don't use them next weekend, because quite often the very, very tiniest bit of the tip will have actually rusted off, and they still sort of feel sharp, but they're not as sharp as a brand new hook. So chuck them in the bin. The other thing, don't ever stick one back in your tackle box. If you do, it will just make every other hook in there rusty, and you've just cost yourself 50 hooks if that's what you've got in there. So when you finish, throw them in the bin. That's the idea. They rust out fast, so if you do leave one in a fish, it'll be gone in a few days. But also, that's how they have to get them to be sharp. They have to use this high carbon steel. If they were stainless steel, they'd last forever, which A, it's not good if you leave one in a fish, and B, they're just not quite as sharp. So there's a couple of things for you.